Hello, welcome to part 6 of this VCE English Comparative Text Analysis tutorial. Just as a quick recap, in the previous tutorials we've looked at how we unpack the prompt. We've written some synonyms for the key words in that prompt, and from that we have derived the key insights, similarities and differences, how the two texts relate to the prompt. And from that, we've then derived the three topic sentences from the two texts, how they relate back to the prompt. We then looked at how to structure the essay in terms of introduction, body paragraphs, and the conclusion, and the elements that are involved in each of those key parts of the essay structure. And then we had a look at the introduction and how you might structure the introduction in terms of introducing the author and the text, the context of the text in context of the prompt, and the topic sentences 1, 2, and 3 for those two texts as they relate back to the prompt. So now we turn to the body paragraph. Here on the screen I've just got the whole paragraph, and what we've done is you can see that we're splitting the paragraph up into the sort of key parts of what's involved in that paragraph. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at each part in turn. So let's do that now. Okay, so let's just remind ourselves of the prompt that was the title of the essay. Compare how conflict within communities is demonstrated in the two texts. And if we remind ourselves, the body paragraphs comprises of a number of things: the topic sentences, the evidence from both texts, and then a concluding sentence. So let's have a look at how that works in practice. Okay, the first thing we do is we write down the topic sentence as it relates to the prompt, and I've suggested that we might like to use the structure: when something happens, there are consequences. So if we look at that in terms of this particular topic sentence, we might say something like, when confronted by conflict, there are some communities which will be divided while others will unite. Okay, so that's the topic sentence there. And what we can see is we are addressing the prompt here with the keywords. Okay, and then we're also making sure we introduce the idea behind that key topic sentence. Okay, so then we come to the next part. So what we want to do is we want to give the evidence from text A. So if we look a little bit further down the screen, okay, here we've highlighted here text A, evidence. Okay, so let's just have a read through this paragraph first. Brooke depicts a Puritan society under a reforming Church of England and a more free-thinking Quaker mentality which motivates the villagers of AM to work together. Montpellier's sermon dispels fear of the plague being a punishment, and he urges the villagers to accept this gift as a casket of gold from God to be received with open arms. The rousing speech successfully unites the community to face the crisis together, and by presenting the plague as an opportunity, he encourages the community to isolate and quarantine the plague seeds, where greater love no man hath than this, that he lay down his life for a friend. Okay, so it sounds pretty complicated at first, and what we're not going to really focus on the language and the presentation of the language and how sophisticated it is. What we're going to do is focus on what is key here. So in terms of elements, so the first thing we can say is, okay, this first part here, Brooke depicts a Puritan society in the reforming Church of England and a more free-thinking Quaker mentality which motivates the villagers of AM to work together. Okay, now this first part of the evidence that you're giving is really a summary of the author's intention in context of the topic sentence and the prompt. So here what we're saying is the author is illustrating or demonstrating how the characters in the story will come to work together. And this links back to the idea that some communities will unite. Okay, so we make a statement from this text A evidence part of the paragraph in terms of saying what the author is achieving. Then what we do is we look to give the evidence for that. So here, we start to look at the evidence for that particular part. So my parents dispels fear of the plague being a punishment, and he urges the villagers to accept this gift as a casket of gold from God to be received with open arms. The rousing speech successfully unites the community to face the crisis together, and by presenting the plague as an opportunity, he encourages the community to isolate and quarantine the plague seeds, where greater love no man hath than this, that he laid down his life for friends. So all of that in pink is basically the proof or the evidence of the first part of the sentence, which is, he motivates the villagers of AM to work together, or the author motivates the villagers of AM to work together. Okay, and if we look at this part here, successfully unites the community to face the crisis together. So again, we're staying relevant to the topic sentence, and the topic sentence is staying relevant to the prompt. So there's this constant idea of linking things together. So that shows you the elements in that particular part of this paragraph. Okay, so topic sentence, and then text A evidence, and the text A evidence begins with the author's demonstration, or whatever the author is showing relevant to the topic sentence, and then we give a little bit of the evidence for that. What we also note is that there is a lot of quotes which we have embedded in the sentence, and that's something which you draw upon your knowledge of the text after we have spent the year brainstorming all of the quotes which support the various themes and ideas that we have. Okay, so let's move down and have a look at the rest of this paragraph. So moving further down this paragraph, okay, so the next part of this paragraph is to give the evidence for text B, and we will do the same thing. First of all, we give the statement of how the author is demonstrating the topic sentence. So if we look at this particular part, conversely, Miller's repressive theocratic community in Salem encourages the majority of the countries to act alone rather than as a cohesive unit. So here, act alone rather than as a cohesive unit. So we're linking back to the topic sentence. It will divide some communities, it will unite some other communities. What we're doing in this second part of the paragraph when we're giving the text B evidence is we're using lots of transition words, or in other words, let's just get rid of that. Transition words. So we're comparing the two texts together. Okay, and then after that, then we give the evidence from the text which supports that statement, which supports the topic sentence. So if we look through this, you can see the explanation. So all of this in pink is the evidence to support the statement of text B, which relates to the topic sentence and prompt, and in turn the prompt. So Miller describes the witch hunts carried out to remove the devil and evil spirits which are blamed for natural phenomena as a manifestation of the panic which escalates mistrust and social hysteria, and in stark contrast to Brooks's united society leads to greater individual freedom, which ultimately undermines the Puritan social structure. Ironically, the increased skepticism of authoritative figures in the crucible leads to ever tighter control to maintain order as people act to protect the established authority. Miller addresses this as a paradox in which the abuse of power is inspired by ignitions of rebellion, which propels dissent towards the high courts and fractures the community. Okay, so kind of a sophisticated use of language there, but let's not get too bogged down with that. Let's again just pick out some of the key things. So escalates mistrust and social hysteria, and in Stockholm's Butching leads to greater individual freedom, which ultimately undermines the Puritan social structure. Ironically, the increased skepticism of authoritative figures in the crucible leads to ever tighter control to maintain order as people act to protect the established authority. So people act to protect that. Miller addresses as a paradox in which the abuse of power is inspired by ignitions of rebellion, which propels dissent and the high courts and fractures the community. So here I'm picking out the key parts which reflect the idea that the community becomes divided, the community is fractured, all the synonyms that we're using. And this is the opposite of Brooks's novel, where the community comes together in the face of crisis. So we're just picking out and constantly supporting and sustaining the idea. The other thing, again, is that we're embedding lots of quotes, manifestation of the panic, which is a stark contrast to Brooks' society leads to greater individual freedom. We're talking about so I think it's a paradox. It's about ignitions of rebellion. So the embedded quotes also support the points that we're making for the evidence which supports the first statement and then the topic sentence. And again, just to point out, we're using these transition words, to tell the assessor that in this particular part of the paragraph we are comparing this text to the other text and highlighting with these transition words the differences or the similarities between the two texts. So that's that part of the paragraph. So again, just to recap, we introduce the topic sentence, we give text A evidence, we get text B evidence. Within the text A and text B evidence, the first thing we do is make a statement from the author of how the author is achieving whatever it is we've identified as the topic sentence, and then we give the evidence in pink from that with embedded quotes to support the statement and thus the topic sentence, and the topic sentence thus proves the prompt. Okay, so that's sort of the theory behind this essay structure of the body paragraphs. Okay, so moving on, the last part of the body paragraph is the concluding sentence down here, okay, at the bottom. So let's just highlight that, the concluding sentence. So how does that look? Let's read it first. Both authors engage the crucible as a metaphor within the context of social strife. Brooks emphasizes the positive connotations of a crucible to purify in light of the fiery furnace that God sends under the guise of the plague, and Montpellier presents it as a challenge for the community to better themselves and act with solidarity. In contrast, Miller uses the metaphor via Danforth, who seeks to melt all concealment as they burn a hot fire, creating fear and splitting the community in the pursuit of eliminating the mischief of witchcraft. Okay, so again, quite a sophisticated use of language, but let's not get too worried about that. Let's just have a look at the key parts of this. Okay, so here, we are summarizing the body paragraph by looking at an overview. Both authors engage the crucible as a metaphor within the context of social strife. So here we're coming back to this idea of community in crisis or conflict. And then we look at each author. Brooks emphasizes the positive connotations of a crucible to purify in light of the fiery furnace that God sent under the guise of the plague, and Montpellier presents it as a challenge for the community to better themselves and act with solidarity. Okay, so here we're supporting the topic sentence, the statement that Brooks demonstrates a community coming together. And then we give the contrast, the difference. Miller uses the metaphor via Danforth, who seeks to melt all concealment as they burn a hot fire, creating fear and splitting the community in the pursuit of eliminating the mischief of witchcraft. So once again, also supporting the author's statement for that text B evidence, which is that crisis will split the community. And what you can see here, just in general terms, for this concluding paragraph, is that it's not repeating the topic sentence. It's not a repeat of the topic sentence. It's not a repeat of anything we've said in the text A and text B evidence or in the introduction. It's extending the idea or the theme or whatever it is we're talking about. So here we've extended the idea of communities in crisis to a metaphor of the crucible, in which both texts have used it. So we use that to extend the idea in order to support the topic sentence, and that's something that you have to try and do when you're finishing off the paragraph. Okay, so those are the key elements. Again, let's not get too bogged down in the language or the sophistication of the language. Let's just try and see this in terms of the key elements of the paragraph and how we present them. Let's have another look at another example. Okay, just quickly, 1 second. Okay, so the second body paragraph that we would have thought about for this particular prompt, conflict within communities, goes as follows. So the first thing we do for the second body paragraph is to state the topic sentence with the when there are. So when confronted by conflict, there are some individuals that will act courageously or compassionately despite the risks involved. Okay, and again, let's just highlight the fact that we are still staying relevant to the prompt. There are some individuals, okay, and what were despite the risks involved, and what we're doing here is we're looking at how the two texts approach this idea respectively. So that topic sentence is the key thing that we derived from our brainstorming earlier on when we unpacked the prompt and so on. So that's the first thing we do, is we state the topic sentence for the second body paragraph. Okay, let's read down through the next part. Okay, Miller uses his depiction of John Proctor to exemplify this, a character deeply troubled for his sins early in the play, but who ultimately gains redemption through courage. Proctor is respected, even feared earlier in the play, but seeks atonement for behavior against his own vision of decent conduct, and where, for the villagers of Salem, these people have no ritual for the washing away of sins. Eventually, Proctor confronts the villagers' authorities in the hysteria which threatens to overwhelm the community due to baseless claims of witchcraft, and Proctor's voice is that which Miller asserts is truthful. Thus, by the end of the play, Proctor can see some goodness in himself after the hot fire of the witch trials pits him against the court and those in authority who use the conflict for their own purposes without regard for truth. Okay, so we come down to, oops, let's just get this, okay. This paragraph is the evidence. Okay, so the first thing we do is we make the author point. Okay, and we just highlight this in a different color to make it obvious. Okay, so Miller uses his depiction of John Proctor to exemplify this. Exemplify what? Exemplify that there are some individuals that will act courageously or compassionately despite the risks involved. A character deeply troubled for his sins early in the play, but who ultimately gains redemption through courage. Okay, so that statement there, the author's point, okay, links back to the topic sentence. There are some individuals that will act courageously or compassionately despite the risks involved. And then we give the evidence for that. So all of this other part of the paragraph is the evidence for that author point or that author statement which supports the topic sentence, and that topic sentence which supports the prompt. Okay, and again, we're not going to get bogged down with the language and how sophisticated it is or how eloquent it sounds. What we're just doing here is seeing the elements that are involved. Okay, and let's just pick out some of the key things again. You know, all of these quotes are embedded in the paragraph, and these embedded quotes support the evidence that we're explaining supports the author's point and thus the topic sentence. Okay, thus by the end of the play, Proctor can see some goodness in himself. So that's an example of his courage. He pits himself against the courts. So despite the risks to himself, he stands up for his morals, moral integrity. And again, you know, conflict here is linking back to the idea here. So we can see how this part of the paragraph introduces text A evidence with an author point and then the evidence for that author point which supports the prompt. Okay, let's carry on reading down. Second part of the paragraph, body paragraph 2, we're giving text B evidence. Similarly, Brooks's protagonist Hannah Frith eventually recognizes the crisis as an opportunity to transform following her initial despair. So there we are giving the author's statement or the author's main point, which supports the topic sentence and thus the prompt. Okay, when Eleanor says, "I wonder if you know how you have changed," Brooks points out that Anna is no longer a humble servant girl, but a woman who has faced more terrors than many warriors. Anna is a character who transcends gender barriers and social class and gives others hope. The novel's circular structure permits Anna's growth in confidence and authority, and she gains control, and she controls the reflective narration of events. In spite of her own personal grief, Anna's courage, compassion, and ability to learn allow her to realize her potential for growth. From shy servant, Anna becomes a woman able to shape her own destiny. Okay, so yeah, it sounds complicated, but it's all evidence from the text which supports the author's statement at the beginning of this particular part of the paragraph, and we are just keeping it relevant to what we are talking about. So if we pick out some of the things, okay, eventually recognizes the crisis as an opportunity to transform following her initial despair. So she gains courage, she gains compassion. I wonder if you know how you have changed. Transformation. Anna is no longer a humble servant girl, but a woman who had faced more terrors than many warriors. So in the conflict, in social hysteria, in adversity, all the synonyms that we used, Anna is a character who transcends gender barriers and socials and gives others hope. So compassion, courage. The novel's circular structure permits Anna's growth in confidence and authority, and she controls the reflective narration of events in spite of her own personal grief. So crisis, conflict, self-doubt, internal conflict. Anna's courage, compassion, and ability to learn allows her to realize her potential or transform for growth. From shy servant, Anna becomes a woman able to shape her own destiny. All of those things are supporting the idea that the character has transformed in the face of crisis, and that supports the topic sentence, that some individuals will show compassion and courage in the face of conflict. Okay, so again, let's not dwell on the language, let's just see how this body paragraph has been structured. And then finally, the concluding sentence, if we remind ourselves, is first of all, a general overview of both texts, and then it extends the idea. So let's just read that through. John Proctor and Anna Frith demonstrate courage, compassion and moral integrity with the capacity to transform during social hysteria and conflict, during which time it would be far easier to despair. So demonstrate courage, compassion and moral integrity with a capacity to transform during social hysteria and conflict, linking back to the topic sentence and thus the prompt. John Proctor comes to terms with his self-doubt, whereas Anna Frith advances as an individual. So comes to terms with self-doubt, Anna Frith advances as an individual. It is Brooks, however, who remains the more optimistic about the power of a catastrophic event to result in personal change, because it is her protagonist who flourishes during crisis, whereas Miller's character is ultimately doomed. So whereas, okay, so they both demonstrate courage here. So we've got a similar comparative there, but then we've got a contrasting view there. So there's a more pessimistic view from Miller. So that's how we would round out that body paragraph. So again, just these are the key elements that you would write about in the body paragraph, and I hope this gives a good illustration of the way you should be structuring your body paragraphs when you are writing, and you must keep the links consistent through linking back to the topic sentence, and the topic sentence in turn supports the prompt. Okay, I hope this helps. Thank you very much.